thank you all three. We've heard some interesting themes. We've heard about the challenges of transition. We've had about things of partnership and discussion. I like the point about sort of moving from a binary sales relationship to greater discussion. And we've heard perspectives from for-profit publisher, from the academic not-for-profit community, and from the sort of the funding point of view. So I think that there's a good range of views there. We have a roving microphone at the back with our terrific assistant there, who will be handing out prizes for the first question. So does anybody have any questions to kick off with? Any thoughts or observations? Yes, please.
Introduce yourself and say where you're from.
Ian Burgess at Waters Cleuer. It's a question for Richard regarding the Hindawi-Wiley collaboration. The 9 journals, who owns them?
That's a good question. So currently they're Wiley journals, so in effect we act as a contract publisher on their behalf. Over the period of the contract of the agreement, then the ownership will go to a 50-50 basis between us and Wiley.
And so, are there any, I know you probably aren't going to divulge, but are there any plans to involve society owners in the project? Society-owned journals in the project?
I think that at this point with the partnership with Wiley, I think it'd probably get very messy at this moment in time, just because obviously there are other drivers. I mean, I think that there are other opportunities for someone like Hindawi to work with society publishers, societies in their publishing program. I mean, there's always opportunities, and I think that, having other valid models to be able to develop open access options for society publishers without actually giving away their brand equity and the ownership of the journal, I think that's going to be an increasing kind of opportunity, and probably there's a lot of players who are starting to look at opportunities in this sort of space. But no, at the moment, I think the model will be Wiley-owned journals transitioning, and then, who knows, kind of, I suppose, 2-3 years down the line, how that will progress.
Thank you.
Another question, actually, for Richard.
Sorry, can we just wait for the microphone, please? Thank you.
Another question for Richard. This is Richard Getty from STM. Some years ago, I seem to remember that Hindawi engaged in perhaps a rather similar partnership arrangement with Sage, and I wonder what happened to those journals. Are they now wholly owned by Hindawi, or?
No, so yes, they did. The arrangement was that then those journals went back into the Sage portfolio, so they've continued to be successful, and they've gone back into they were effectively sold back into the Sage arrangement.
Anything else? I think I might ask a question to the whole panel, if I may. Really about the global take-up, because I know. Say, Emily, you're operating around Montreal, so you've got a challenge just to have those conversations extending across the rest of Canada. And then we heard about how the UK is sort of out on its own. So I'm interested in what the panel's thoughts on how do we get the world moving forward, or maybe we've hit a sort of steady state of, if you like, kind of managed chaos, if I might put it that way, where we will continue just to see regional differences, which reflects different stages of growth around the world and even within territories. So I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on the future globally. If I might.
Yeah. Well, in Canada, it's really particular to Canada, but we are trying right now to move to what I call an integrated ecosystem, and it's challenging, but it involves granting agencies, PKP journals, Érudit also. And what we're thinking about is to have services to journals, so to integrate OGS software suites into Érudit, and then to have that linked to the granting agencies. So when I was talking about the partnership and the possibility to extend the partnerships to other consortia agreements, it's true and it's not true also, because probably the best way we will go, or the success, if we want to success, it will be through a major investment of the granting agencies to have a not-for-profit ecosystem for all Canada and not rely on big deal. Because having partnerships, having big deals switch into partnership, it's still based on the same, it's the same basis. So yeah, we're trying to do that, but
Yeah. So, Liam, any thoughts about a move to a sort of, I don't know, a globally funded not-for-profit umbrella? Now, there's an interesting, vision. I don't know how realistic it is.
I think that we are just into the nitty-gritty of making it financially viable and workable for different consortia in different countries. There are different drivers. Even within Europe, you know, my colleagues in Denmark are appalled at the agreements that we've done. You know, they're saying you're just increasing your costs. Why are you doing this? So, and the US, they had the Pay It Forward study looking at how that might make some of these agreements work there. It just demonstrated it was very difficult. In our negotiations with individual publishers, I think you really have to. We're finding there is no silver bullet, you know, for these types of agreements, and I think that one of the disappointingly one of the strengths of the big deal is, and how it's been laid out, is it does at least recognise the reality of institutional budgets as they are today, and is a relatively efficient mechanism, therefore, for making all of that content available. Now, that doesn't mean it's where we want to be, but moving away from it to something which does work is proving really quite challenging for us. So I think we are looking at a range of agreements which will manage that transition. And I do think there is increasingly perhaps a realisation. I know you talked about APCs at the start, but I really do think that there is, you know, more and more questioning of is an APC model the best way of achieving this across the board? We need to be perhaps more subtle and nuanced for different types of publishers in different subject domains in different countries.
Would you see that, or what alternative models would you have in mind there?
I do think that there is, it's making them work at scale, but I think some of those library partnership models where you perhaps have more stake in the governance and things like that, that really does appeal to people. That now, whether it appeals rhetorically, but in reaction everybody's, I just don't want to be bothered with this, I don't know. But I do think that there is something about having a stake in the ownership and the way in which something plays out which appeals to people. But I'm afraid I don't have any answers there. I'm still trying to finish off the negotiations for this year.
Yeah. Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I mean, the transition is from a publisher perspective, is being fueled by the restrictions that we see from institutional library budgets. And so I think, you know, as much as funders are pushing on one side, there's an increasing pressure, you know, from a publisher perspective, to look at models to provide journal growth which are outside of the traditional models. I mean, you can't monetize new subscription journals, really. I mean, it just very few work, very few are successful. So that in itself is going to be look at and mean that publishers are going to have to look at the open access route, or a route akin to that, to be able to provide the kind of growth that they're looking for from a revenue perspective. So I think naturally that's going to kind of create this transitional push, just because as Liam says, the big deals are soaking up so much more, and the revenue is going to have to come from another source. I think also the other part that is kind of really interesting is that I think the barrier to entry for becoming an open access publisher is so much lower than the subscription world. I mean, subscription world, you had to run, you know, either you were going through subscription agents, you were running big institutional teams, you were looking at all of these distribution networks, whereas actually, you know, moving to what is effectively a B2C model or a central funded model with open availability of content, changes the kind of people who are becoming publishers, and you see this. I mean, there's a burgeoning library publishing scene, and that's the universities, publishing scene. I mean, you've got partnerships now with funders becoming publishers. So, I mean, I think that there are many other kind of options. Institution as publisher. So I think we will see this transition, and it's going to be driven by the fact that not just the number of articles wanting to be published is growing, but then there's no way of monetizing that in from a traditional model. That's going to push it. The funders are, increasingly bringing in mandation of open access and open science as we're now looking at it. And also, I think there's going to be many more players. I mean, the landscape might look very different in 10 years. So I think, how that transition is going to play out, I think we yet to see. It's still organised chaos, probably. I think for the next few years.
Thank you. Any observations from the floor?
It's not related to that, though. Sorry, this is Sian Harris from INASP, and I've almost completely lost my voice, so apologies. This is a question to Emily, and I was going to ask you, you mentioned that there's not much market for French-speaking journals, and I wondered if you see much interest from French-speaking African countries.
Much more interest into our journals?
Yeah, in the French ones.
In the French ones?
So yeah.
Well, yes. When we look at usage statistics, it's quite clear that they are reading the journals, downloading the journals, but there's no money. So we cannot be in the same model of selling, because the libraries in Algeria or Morocco don't have any money. So we had to I think if we want to continue to be able to publish in French, it has to be in open access. And it has to be in open access because of the wide, because of the access, but that doesn't solve the money problem. Yeah. And so we were trying now to do a partnership, and you were saying that partnership with libraries is probably a good way to go, but going that way is hard, because libraries surprisingly are they still want to buy something, and when we say to them, well, yeah, we will be partners, we will open our books, you will see how much it costs, and then you will, we will work together, and they are really reluctant to that. They are still asking, well, how much does it cost? So that's why in the first phase, they asked to have real data about how does it cost to publish. So we made a study, and just to realize that if libraries would have to pay the real publishing costs, it would be really much higher that they already pay for Canadian content. So I'm going there from your question, but yeah.
So is it that libraries, they want to buy a thing and they're struggling to buy into a service and a kind of wider? Is that the challenge?
The challenge is to change the mentality. Yeah. Change the mentality, and to find a way to work together instead of being a vendor and a journal provider. And that is much more difficult than we have expected, because libraries are struggling. They don't have money. And if we have one, open access, two, and not-for-profit platform built from the community, for the community, in which libraries have seats in the board, it's still not enough for them to have confidence that it's the right way to go.
It's interesting, Emily. I would confess that I'm completely new to the ecology that you've been describing. And so forgive me if the following question is a little bit dumb, but I'm wondering whether the sort of partnerships that you're envisaging where libraries actually take a stake, is this a sort of partnership where libraries might invest simply in order to make stuff open access, or is it a partnership where they might invest in order that if an open access model charging APCs is successful, they might actually recoup some of their investment and actually get some revenues coming in?
Well, Canadian journals don't rely very much on APC. So
In Canadian open access journals.
in the Canadian landscape. So I don't think that's the problem.
So libraries are being asked to make an investment, but not an investment that would bring them any potential return.
Well, the thing is, in that, changing seats, everybody wants to have a bit of the power. So libraries wants to become the one who would be the provider of the journals. I mean, they want to be publishers. So when we're dealing with them, they say, well, no, I want to put money into my journals and in my infrastructure.
Yeah. At the same time, they presumably don't want to disenfranchise their users from having access to Elsevier journals and Springer journals.
No. So that's it. And they negotiate the same way with us, the same way as we were Elsevier or Springer or so on. So that's why we are working with the granting agencies, because right now, Érudit or PKP that are becoming quite the same right now. We are working on this. It's not recognized as, it's not financed on a regular basis. So I think what we think that the library should finance open access journals, finance journals, and then granting agencies should finance the open access, the not-for-profit platform. And then libraries will have to find their places in that. Because I think having to pay, it's still having a power.
So
You
presumably,
choose what you're paying for, and it's a power.
so presumably, if you're looking for funding for these APC-free journals from the funders, then the librarians are going to have to say, have we got services in kind that we can offer that can, the sort of the pipe work that will actually make it work, and how can we do that as an offshoot of stuff that we're already doing?
Just to summarize, just to be able to, just to see if I understand well, you're saying that libraries should provide services to journals? Yeah, well, that's a thing. In Canada, there's two models. That the English part of Canada was, there's OGS there, Open Journal Systems, and it's really well implanted, and libraries are hosting OGS instances, and they feel that they are already paying for journals. So they are giving services to journals, like hosting and then mise à jour, is like updating the software and then helping journals using the software. So they feel that they are giving services. But it's not the same thing in the French part of Canada, where OGS is nowhere. Libraries don't have the same role. And when trying to join the two initiatives and asking English Canadian libraries to pay in a partnership for OGS journals, they feel like it's a double dipping. But the English part of Canada needs an integrated platform, so their journals are available into databases, libraries, and so on. So that's where we are, confronting, trying to discuss.
Any other thoughts on sort of that general platform, general problem of how we start to bridge these boundaries or silos, I suppose, is a...
I was just thinking that, you know, libraries are not homogenous at all.
Mm-hmm.
They have different institutional drivers and different funding drivers. I think some of the challenges that Emily was talking about might be related to the level at which one goes into an institution as well. If you're approaching people who their role, their organisational structures, if you like, are based around purchasing subscriptions, it can become difficult for them. I remember with an agreement that we were trying to, a library partnership agreement, the first question was, how many APCs do I get? Well, it's not about that, you know. So that some of the conceptual elements are not there, and that's why I think we probably try and elevate the discussion to library director or funder level sometimes as well, to build that understanding of different approaches. But I just think you illustrate just the number of complexities and the number of challenges associated with any of this. But, you know, funds does play a big role in this ultimately.
So, given all the challenges, overall, if you were to think 10 or 20 years ahead, would the panel be optimistic or pessimistic about, you know, whether because we're dealing, I think, with a very networked environment. We've got the internet. I mean, sharing information has never been easier, and yet we've got hyper-localized approaches to dealing with it. Libraries, institutions, funders, publishers all have different levels. So how are we going to square that circle, and are you optimistic or pessimistic that these discussions and these collaborations that we're seeing will start to make progress? It may be slow, but do we think we'll get somewhere? Or will it be like this forever? But actually, why don't we start at this end of the panel?
Looking at the publishing industry, it probably won't change very much. Sadly, as I said, I think I think definitely. I'm an open access publisher, so there's a definite optimism. We're seeing growth, we're seeing expansion. You know, it follows the remit to give the widest possible dissemination of scholarly research. So that progression and that openness is incredibly exciting and very optimistic. And I think we still yet to see what are the derivative kind of products that come from having this big body of work that's openly available, that's mineable, that's available in, you know, CC BY form. So I think, and the folks at Digital Science have been looking at this for quite significantly to look at what else we can do with the data. So yeah, very much it's excitement and interest about what kind of potentially might come from it. From, I suppose, a commercial publishing perspective, I think that the barriers to entry are dropping. I mean, and there are a lot of other potential kind of publishers or people who could become publishers. So as much as, but I mean, what history has kind of told us so far is that, you know, the long tail will continue to develop. The big commercial guys will, you know, continue to be able to control a lot of the research and the infrastructure. I mean, we will only see a large transition if we start moving, if we have some way of researchers moving away from this value comparison, you know, of I have an article in, and it's this journal title, which is the value piece, so the stamp of authority, to having articles that have some accepted stamp of authority at the article level, and only then we'll see this kind of real kind of disambiguation, this dissemination of these powerful structures in these journal brands. That's going to take a long time. I mean, that's going to take a lot of time for, you know, the academy to kind of change and transition and the way that people act. So I think, massively optimistic in many, many ways. How quickly this is going to change, I very much think it's going to be a slow kind of evolution.
Yeah. Liam?
Yeah, optimistic. I see no slackening off of interest in open access. I just see more interest in more models. I'm not sure it will look like this if and when it does happen. Like Richard, I just think it probably will take longer than people anticipated or hoped it would take. But no, I don't see, in a UK context, at a policy level, I see I see just as much interest in open access and even greater interest now in open science as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm optimistic for the open access, but in our point of view, or maybe mine, just the goal is to be able to maintain a diversity while being able to adopt open access. And so a 20 years window is like too much. I think we have to move fast, like 5 years from now. So all the French Canadian or English Canadian journals won't die because, French from France don't want our journals, and English from United States don't want Canadian English journals. So we have to maintain an ecosystem. So in that sense, yes, open access, but we still need to be able to publish something.
Yeah.
That's the big point. Yeah.
That's a sort of globalization challenge.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we're, I'm just looking at, well, we got one more question. Oh, please. No, so, well, I'd like to thank our panellists very much. I think we've had some interesting thoughts and discussion. Thank you for your questions. We talked about themes of transition. I was trying to think of some way of wrapping this up, and I think on the whole, the outlook is optimistic that the long tail of change may actually start to wag the dog of inertia, but it may take a while to happen yet, I think, if I was to sum it up. And certainly, I thought the interesting points about there's lots of local challenges that will affect local ecosystems. I imagine if you're a net sort of producer of research like Canada versus, I thought, the question about the consumption into other French-speaking countries, where you're maybe a net consumer of research, that could well tease out interesting issues as well. Thank everyone very much. I think we have one more. Hand over to Phil now.
Session before lunch. All right. So, could you thank the panel, please?